Alright. Alright. We're going to try and finish this book. We're going to be listening to The Taxpayers, God Forgive These Bastards, songs from the Forgotten Life of Henry Turner in the background, which is the album that basically I heard this and that encouraged me to get the book. I got the book. It's a good book. And the album's about the book, which is Henry Turner. We're on chapter 5. The thing that interested us most about the Lyndale case was how long it went on. The corruption ran so deep that even the city council was involved. And the reason it took so long for this guy to surface. And that's the reason it took so long for this guy to surface. Detective Mike Mullen, in an interview with the Cleveland Plain Dealer, 1986. Chapter 5, Lyndale, City of Garbage. The way the damn clouds just hung around in those days, when I think of mid-1980s Cleveland, all I see are these sad gray skies and the sully decay of a town that most had given up on. You could tell by the way those folks walked that they didn't sleep much, and it made them desperate and mean. Just desperate enough to stay at their cruel jobs, and just mean enough to keep the factories running. It was fast and cold hard, and it made me sick. But I suppose that's what a prison is going to do. I lasted 4 months at Allied Steel, longest employment of my life. First thing I did when I got to town was walk into their hiring office with nothing but the dirt in my hands to offer. Resume? Left it at home. Experience? Well, I used to band nails in little bits with a wrench when I was a kid. That count? They hired me on the spot. It was a dangerous job and the turnover rate was high. My second day there, they put me in charge of melting scraps with the arc furnace. And it was fun work if you put your mind to it. The bright orange flames bursting from the machines, the clanging of different metals, glowing sparks shooting towards the ceiling. It was like a party in an industrial hell, and everyone was working together to make it happen. Some of the fellas there were nice too. During a lunch break, this big Ukrainian guy named Carl offered me one of his beers, and we hit it off. Carl was born in Cleveland, and he'd been with Allied since he was practically a kid. It was work for the mad, he said, which suited him just fine, and it was a job where you didn't have to think much. Trouble with Carl, though, was that he was too curious. Wanted to know where you were from, whereabouts you lived, and the last thing in the world I wanted was to tell people about my miserable life. When he found out that I was living out my car, he flipped his lid. Hank, what are you, a fucking bum? No, you ain't a fucking bum. You're working. You got a job. You're making money. You don't need to live like damn bum. Jesus. Tell you what, you ever heard of Lyndale? It's this neighborhood on the west side. Quiet, cheap. I rent a place there for practically nothing. Come live with me. Take the attic room. Hell, it'll be great. A fucking bachelor pad. That's what we'll have. Shit, can you imagine? Carl, I told him. Listen, I'm honored, I am, but I can't. I don't want to be a bother. We just met, you know? He waved his hand and rolled his eyes. Oh, shut up. You're living in your fucking car like a fucking bum. I ain't taking no for an answer. Hey, consider it a favor to me. I could use the company. What could I say? It was that or another night in the Pontiac. And it was getting to the point where I would have probably spent the night in a dungeon if it meant being able to stretch my legs for an hour. Plus, hell, I'd had crazier friends than Carl. Shit, I knew a guy who'd allowed to cut off his index finger, sauteed it with onions, and then ate it. All on a $100 bet because he needed the money for dope. And him and I got along fine. Lyndale, it turned out, was interesting for a few reasons. Everybody in and around Cleveland despised it. Why? It was a town that made its money off speeding tickets. It just so happened that the I-71 highway went through the middle of Lyndale, and the cops, the two of them that the city had, would just sit there on the highway in their cruisers picking off people left and right for going more than 5 miles above the limit. Almost every person you talked to had gotten a ticket from the Lyndale speed trap at some point in their lives. It contained a grand total of 27 households. Something like 60 people resided in the village, and even though it was right on the border, it was its own separate city from Cleveland, if you could call it that. They used the revenue from speeding tickets to invest in social services for the community, in the mayor's words, which meant that every citizen got a free smoke detector, courtesy of Town Hall. There was absolutely no recorded history for the city of Lindale between 1975 and 1980. None. Not in the library, the newspapers, nowhere. Just from what folks told me about the place, I could tell there was something seriously sinister underneath the surface. Turned out I was right, though it took me a couple of months to figure it out. When I pulled up to Carl's house, he was waiting on the front porch with a beer in one hand and a lit cigarette in the other. I parked on the street and looked around. Everything just felt dirty. From the sidewalks, the neighbors' cars, to the way every window looked more like melted plastic than glass. Some stray feral cat ran by and dove into an open sewer grate. A swarm of gnats descended upon me. I heard a strange crunching sound and looked down. The street itself was covered in years of broken glass and old wrappers, to the point where it looked like the bottom of a dumpster. And the smell, God, what was that? The stench snuck deep into my throat, and I felt sick to my stomach. Lindale should be spending their speeding ticket money on street cleaners, not smoke detectors, I thought. 4067 West 120th was this skinny two-story brick house with rotting wood siding, gutters that hung by a thread, and a small barren yard. When I walked up the steps to the tiny front porch, Carl embraced me with both his big arms and started laughing. He was already sauced. "Hank, welcome, you big motherfucker. You and me are gonna be roommates. So you just make yourself at home. Come on now, come on in. Let me show you the place." He stumbled into the living room and waved his hands in a grand gesture. "This whole palace is ours, as far as the eye can see. Go on, have yourself a look around. I ain't too good at giving tours. I'm gonna grab another beer. You want one?" "Yeah, sure thing, Carl. That'll be fine." He exited into the kitchen and left me alone in the living room. It was alright. A few couches, an old TV, a big grandfather clock ticking away. I walked over to the first door. I saw and turned the handle. It was locked. Suddenly, Carl reappeared behind me. Except that door. That one goes to the basement. It's my workplace, you know. Man's gotta have his workplace. If you don't mind, I'd appreciate it if you kept out of it. It ain't a big thing or nothing. Just man's gotta have his private workplace. I nodded. "Sure, Carl, I understand. You mind if I head upstairs to the attic, check out my new bedroom?" He handed me a beer and nodded his head. "Knock yourself out, Hank." I jogged up the stairs, opened the door to the attic space, and the first thing that hit me was the smell. It was thick, oppressive, and smelled like a combination of vomit and hot trash. I looked around the room for the source of it. There was one solitary window in the room, which was open. No closet, no bathroom, wood floors. Then a wave of stink overcame me and I gagged. "Carl, hey, I think a mouse died in here or something." He ran up the stairs, entered the attic, and looked around. Saw the open window, made a dash for it, and slammed it shut. "Ugh, I must have forgotten to close that window. Hank, there's one rule in this house. Never open a window. Don't matter how hot it is. Whether you need to get some fresh air, whatever reason you can think of, don't open a single window." I was incredulous. Why?" He sighed. "God, there's this weird bastard that lives next door. He's, what do you call it? There's a word for it. He hoards. He's a pack rat. Which means he keeps everything he finds, including old shoes, broken microwaves, even trash. There's piles of it all over his yard. I've tried talking to the city about it, but they're too busy handing out speeding tickets and won't listen. Go on. You can see it from here. Look out the window." When I went back out to the car to bring my belongings inside, I remembered to plug my nose. We eased into this strange sort of routine after I moved in with Carl. Since he worked the day shift at Allied and I worked the nights, he'd leave me a couple of extra hard-boiled eggs on the kitchen counter for breakfast. I'd eat those with some salt, drink a few cups of coffee, and head off to the plant to milk scraps for 8 hours. On my lunch break, I'd usually grab a beer at Wexler's Tavern with one or two of the other guys, before finishing off my last few hours of work. When I got home, Carl would be waiting with a few more beers, already half hammered, and we drank until he had to go to sleep. We were like the tough guy Cleveland version of Laverne and Shirley. And hey, I kinda liked it. One day I came home, just beat. It had been a long day at work. I was still fighting this vicious hangover, and I wanted nothing more to sleep it off. Of course, when I got there, Carl was his usual drunken, jovial self, and was having none of it. "Oh, come on, Hank. Just stay up a few beers. With me, we're roommates, for God's sakes. Tell you what, you and me can grab those beers, head up to the roof, and throw empty bottles at all those stray cats on the trash pile. It'll be a goddamn riot. And every time you hit a cat, you got to drink another beer. We'll call it Crack the Cat with a bottle of beer. Or something like that. Hell, I don't know. Come on." Carl, Jesus, that sounds great. It does, but I'm all kind of busted up, and I gotta sleep it off. "We'll throw stuffing cats tomorrow, I swear." Now, Carl had been staggering and stumbling ever since I'd gone home, about to tip over any second. But at that moment, he stood straight up and got this curious look in his eyes, almost like a light bulb that just went on in his head. He looked this way and that, and then started whispering, "Hey, Hank, you ever do blow?" I looked at him and laughed. "Me? Hell, that and a whole lot more. And you can quit whispering. Ain't nobody around to hear." He looked over his shoulders again and kept whispering. "All right, follow me." I walked over to the basement door, fumbled around for the key, and unlocked it. The door swung open, and we slowly descended the stairs into a humid, pitch-black room. He spoke as we walked. "So I've got this side job. It doesn't pay well enough for me to quit the factory life, but I'm hoping that someday it might. You might have heard of it too. It's like blow, but better and cheaper. Hell of a lot cheaper." When we reached the room, he flipped a light switch. In a corner of the basement was a wooden work table illuminated by a single light bulb, and the setup on it looked like something out of a science experiment. There were tubes leading from mason jars into other glasses filled with what looked like carbonated orange juice, a small Bunsen burner, balls of Drano, cold medicine. "They say Hitler cured his Parkinson's with it, and I believe it. Up until a few years ago, the only place you could find it was Japan. That is until some folks figured out how to make it at home real easy. The cops call it crystal meth. But this here is homemade bathtub crack, straight from the source, me. You want to know something funny? Guy that showed me how to make it is the mayor. Couldn't risk making it in his own house, you see. So now he buys it straight from me at a good price, and then flips it to some other fellas that he knows. Shit, you ain't gonna tell anybody about this, right? 'Cause we're friends, right? I've been on various famines for various periods of time since I was a kid. The last thing I cared about was whether my roommate sold drugs. Heck, if anything, it meant I could get my shit for cheap, or even free if I played my cards right. Carl, I could care less what you do with your own time. Hey, I'm happy for you. You're a small business owner." He chuckled a bit. "Yeah, I should get suit, huh? Anyway, it's perfect for when you're feeling real tired, like you. You take one hit, you'll feel like $1,000,000. Be able to stay up all night, throwing bottles at cats and drinking beer. What'd you say?" He grabbed a burnt light bulb that he'd rigged up and handed to me. You ever done crank? Shit, how can I describe it? It's one of those amazing feelings you can have, better than an orgasm. The first thing that happens is the burn. It's a surprise at first, and you get a little dizzy. The dizziness then morphs into the most sickeningly sweet pleasure overload you've ever had, which stays with you for hours. It's like all the warmth and power of the sun injected into your body, and you've got the energy and concentration to do just about anything. We grabbed as many empty balls as we could carry and headed to the roof to get those cats once and for all. By the time 5 a.m. rolled around, it became apparent that neither of us were going to work the next day. After the first hit we took in the basement, we spent a good 2 hours on the roof throwing balls before the fatigue hit me like a sack of bricks. Every bone in my body began aching, and I started getting pissed off at nothing in particular. So we took another hit, this time with a little bit more. After that, I started feeling smart, like I could build something, anything. So I set to work making a cardboard shelf. Got out some nails, duct tape, and empty beer boxes, and by the time I'd finished and nailed it to the wall, I was ready for another hit. Put a couple of addicts in the same house with limited supplies. What do you expect? Moderation? After that third big hit, Carl started feeling curious. Hey, Hank, listen. I've lived next to that creepy bastard for years now, and I ain't yet had a chance to look through those piles of junk. Hell, I bet there's some good stuff in there. Come on, what do you say? Let's go jump the fence and check it out. The whole neighborhood's still asleep. Nobody'll know. I was feeling great, invincible practically. So we put on our shoes and set out with the single-minded task of finding treasure in the trash heaps. The sun hadn't yet risen enough to start roasting the garbage, which meant the stench was at an all-time low. But the moment we jumped that fence, it still hit us like a tidal wave. My eyes started watering, my exposed skin started burning, and all those stray cats started bleating like goats in the heat. Rats scurried into their holes. The insects started attacking, but none of that mattered. With all the crank coursing through us, we were set to finish what we had started. I brought a large duffel bag in which to haul off anything good we might discover. Hank, look, an 8-track player. Toss in the bag, Carl. Damn, an old Playboy. Quick, put in the bag. Is that a pogo stick? No, it's a plastic sword, or is that a cane? Hell, put in the bag. We were having a blast, and after about 20 minutes, we nearly filled the duffel bag completely. I decided to find one more decent treasure before heading back. There was one trash pile in the backyard that all the cats seemed to avoid, and it was the only one we'd yet to explore. Now, the stuff on top of this was mostly crap. Apple cores and old newspapers, so I started brushing it all off to the side. And as I dug deeper and deeper, the smell started getting worse, and the trash started giving off this heavy heat. I saw what looked like part of an old car engine, and when I tried to dislodge the engine, some came loose with it. Maggots writhed in and out of the rot, and I started gagging. A hand. Someone's hand. Carl! I looked over to the other end of the yard where Carl stood, frozen, his eyes locked on the back porch where the neighbor stood, calmly surveying the both of us. The neighbor closed the back door, crossed his arms, and quietly called out to us. Help y'all with something? Carl and I looked at each other for a moment and then took off running towards the fence, climbed over it, ran straight into our house through the front door, and locked it behind us. I was shaking so hard I could barely speak. Holy shit, call the cops, Carl. Call the damn cops. The cops? Hank, hell, what are you talking about? I've got a goddamn meth lab set up in this basement. I ain't about to call the fucking cops. A body. I'm telling you, that crazy bastard is a dead body in his backyard. I saw a hand. Carl looked unconvinced. A hand? Are you sure it was human? Shit. The amount of crap in that backyard, it was probably a dead raccoon or something. I know what I saw, Carl. Call the damn cops. He let out a big sigh. Tell you what, Hank. You want to call the cops? You do what you gotta do. Just don't do it in this house, alright? Oh, hell. Go meet him out in the streets or something. Just leave me out of it. I ran to the phone to dial 911, but stopped. A panic slowly took over my body as the image of the Memphis trucker flashed through my head. A mess of skin and hair, blood on the bed sheets, these yellow eyeballs rolling upwards. It was this horrible, sickening panic that wasn't rooted in a fear of getting caught, but in the knowledge of being what I was, and the knowledge that it wouldn't never, ever go away. It was the kind of panic that I imagined the devil would make you feel if he walked over to the bed where you slept, lied down next to you, and wrapped his arms around your body. But it was what it was. I took a deep breath, picked up the phone, and dialed. When the police entered his house, the first thing they found was a body propped up on a chair at the dining room table. Perfectly dressed in a suit, rotting skin, hands gripping a knife and fork, patiently waiting for a dinner they'd never be able to enjoy. In the living room, another body, this one laying down on the couch facing the television. Another upstairs in the bedroom, dressed in a nightgown, tucked underneath the cupboards. They found 7 total, including a few out back in the garbage heaps. And the murals, the ones I told you about earlier, one for every wall and every room of the house. Some of the paintings were of his victims. Others were of himself, happy, rowing a boat, or walking with some woman. But most of the murals were of the cats. The Lindale Stranglers, what the papers called them. You would invite addicts over for some tweak, get them high, and then choke them before they could wander back out in the streets. The terrible stench of the decomposing bodies was masked, or doubled at least, by the piles of garbage strewn all about the yard, and so the neighbors never suspected anything other than a crazy loner who had a problem throwing things away. They did an investigation into where the meth was coming from, which led to Carl, which in turn led to the mayor. Turned out the whole town was in on it. City Hall and everything. Speeding ticket revenue wasn't the only thing that kept this little town afloat. The DEA swept in and declared our house a hazardous waste site due to the chemicals in the basement. So with the place on West 120th out of commission and Carl in jail, I was back to living out the Pontiac, which was alright with me, I guess. Just meant that I had to drink a bit more to get sleep at night, and had to take a bigger hit in the morning to get my mind going before heading off to work. 1 week into it, I stopped showing up. I still don't know if I was ever officially fired from Allied Steel, but I haven't gone back in there to find out. One day I walked back to the spot I'd been parking the Pontiac to find a pile of busted window glass where the car should have been. It's funny. You get to this point where you just start expecting things to go wrong. It softens the blow when they inevitably do. And when things get real bad, you can always remind yourself of when it was just a little bit terrible. I stuck my hands in my pockets with every last possession hanging from my limbs. It was either hitch a ride back to Atlanta and face the music, or hit the streets. And I wasn't about to head down south again. At least not yet. With one last glance at the mess of a town Lindale had become, I shuffled towards the downtown Cleveland skyline. Night was coming on, and you could almost hear the junkies and pickpockets awakening. The safest place to be was where the city lights shined the brightest. And there you go.